Well, I think you make a very strong argument there, and actually thinking about it, I just want to throw all my top four out now and redo it.
Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video, and today I'm delighted to be joined by a very special guest, Mr. Jamie Sefton. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, you all right, Jim?
Very well, thank you. Welcome back to the channel. We last saw Jamie when he came on and we did a two-part video on Trevor Horn.
Exhaustive reports on Trevor Horn.
An exhaustive video. Hopefully today's won't be quite so exhausting. We're going to do something a bit special. We're going to be talking about the Beatles. I know that you're a big fan, aren't you, Jamie? Lifelong fan. Like myself.
Yeah, they're all right.
Yeah, they're okay, yeah. A bit overrated. But so what we thought we'd do is we'd talk about the best of the Beatles, and we're going to ask the question, which is the best Beatles album?
So a nice, easy question to kind of jump into.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to try and settle it for a generation, aren't we? So that nobody else need ever talk about it again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No one can ever have this discussion ever again after this.
Exactly, yeah. So what we say today is law. So
that's it.
But to be serious for a moment, I don't think we can really say what is the best of the Beatles. I guess what we're talking about is our favourite Beatles albums, isn't it?
That has to be, isn't it? It's like, because all of the albums have something about them, you know, even the kind of ones considered to be not as good, you know, like Yellow Submarine, it still has Hey Bulldog on it and stuff. So,
True.
You know, it's such a difficult question. It is down to personal taste, really.
We're going to choose 4 albums that we think could make the grade, and then we're going to count them up 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're each going to end up with a number 1 album that we think is our favourite album. You might want to make a case for it being the best album, but, you know, our favourite album. What we're each going to do first, then, we're going to quickly go through the records that did not make the cut for the final 4. And, of course, in doing that, we will then each reveal to each other and to the viewers what is in our final 4, but we won't reveal what order the 4 are going to be in. So,
and we don't know, do we? I honestly don't know what you've chosen at this point.
So I'll start. I'll kind of whiz through. And I'm going to just really quickly say that I'm not going to put Please Please Me in the list. The debut record, fantastic energy to it, but, you know, the Beatles went on to do far better things, shall we say, you know. Same is true for With the Beatles, which I think was a very worthy follow-up and had some great material. Now we're going to skip one. So this is the first time where you're going to realise what's on my list, okay? Actually, what I'd like to do is put this together with this. And together with this, okay?
Okay.
So I really love the kind of early Beatles when they were really getting into their stride. And then I really like it when they go really experimental and get into all the acid. Now, there's a middle period, which is, what would you call it? The marijuana years, should we say?
I was going to say, that's when they discover... Dylan turned them onto pot or whatever, you know.
Yeah, these are the records which contain the songs that tend to get sung by children in school assemblies. The work takes on a slightly kind of wholesome, safe kind of vibe, you know. Tracks which are really in the canon, I suppose, is busking favourites, nice, tuneful, strum-along songs. So even though I do love the songs, obviously, I just find this era of the Beatles a bit less challenging, a bit less interesting. I find it goes a little bit sing-songy in that era. Still great, but I'm not going to put Magical Mystery Tour in, because even though it contains some good tracks, it wasn't really a proper Beatles album. It was an EP originally, fleshed out with other songs. This is a given. I mean, nobody ever puts this on top, really. This is big news at the moment. Everybody's talking about Let It Be. A flawed record in certain ways. And this is where I'm going to maybe surprise some people. I'm not putting Abbey Road in my 4.
Okay.
So there we go. So you should now know what's in my 4. But
all right.
Do you want to run through your...
Yeah, the ones that nearly got into my top 4, there's 3 of them. Rubber Soul, which I think is a cracking album. I love listening to it from start to finish. You just showed it there, Let It Be.
Okay.
I never really got to like it very much. I didn't grow up with it. I didn't sort of hear it as an album until I was much older. And also, I don't like all the Spector embellishments, even though I think his work with George Harrison and John Lennon after the Beatles was amazing. But it didn't make the cuts. And the other one, which you haven't shown there, which I'm on the fence about putting in there, is the White Album. It's kind of just like a crazy menagerie of stuff. But yeah, in the end, I just couldn't put it in.
Okay.
But that might change. That'll probably change next week.
Well, shall I do my number 4 then? And for my number 4, I'm going to go with this album, A Hard Day's Night. And one of the reasons I wanted to put it in is I really wanted to showcase the early Beatles. I think any Beatles list that does not acknowledge the early period, I think there's maybe something lacking in that list. This is the record where George Martin really takes the Beatles sound and really puts a rocket booster up his backside. You know, from the opening track, just that opening chord at the start of Hard Day's Night, it feels like just the hugest door being kicked down. You know, this absolute pop revolution has arrived. You know, and there's so many great tracks. You've got If I Fell, which has got the most incredible harmonies on it. I mean, just beautiful harmony singing, really showcases what they could do with that. And I Love Her, you know, one of McCartney's most sublime ballads. I mean, the guy was about 20, you know, when he wrote it. I mean, it's just
incredible. And the production, the way that they use kind of, you know, it's a lot more sedate or chilled than a lot of their other tracks, isn't it? It's kind of almost kind of easy listening.
John is in rocker mode with things like When I Get Home and Tell Me Why, and You Can't Do That, I've always loved. Can't Buy Me Love is one of my favourite all-time Beatles songs. I had Pinky and Perky singing that on an EP when I was about 3.
Of course, a superior version.
Absolutely, yeah. And the final track I've always loved, I'll Be Back, I just think is a wonderful deep track, really, a deep cut. It's a song which doesn't get much of a look in, but I think it's got a wonderful atmosphere to it, very enigmatic, very mysterious. So taken overall, I thought to myself, hand on heart, I don't want to leave this album out of the list. It's still a record that I love to put on, dance around the house to, sing along to, fantastic energy, great production. It's the Beatles as the mania hits, as the madness ensues, as it captures the moment when they just become huge stars like the world had never seen before, you know. So that's why it's my number 4.
I think you make a very, very strong argument there, and I think it does capture it. In fact, I've literally just bought it on Blu-ray again to watch it. And I think it's interesting, isn't it, how many of these albums have a visual kind of sound, you know, like a film to go with them as well. Which brings me nicely on to my 4th album, which you said isn't really officially an album.
Okay.
I mean, the Beatles didn't think of it as an official album, really, because this is how I first heard it. You know, I found this weird couple of records in my uncle's collection. It's like, what the heck is this? You know, I was about 6 years old. What is this weird record? You know, I would look at before I even listened to it, I would look at the sort of pictures that were in the booklet, and there's like, you know, an enormous woman being fed, you know, spaghetti by the shovel, and like some strange like guy, you know, with some, you know, weird effect on the camera. So it really sort of made an impression of me. But then when I heard it, this is my kind of very young childhood record, really. And I got a tape of the full album. So, you know, after hearing those tracks, I got a tape of, you know, what became Magical Mystery Tour. It's such a weird album anyway. If you listen to it as just an album, and it kind of conjures pictures in my head of sort of faded color cine film, and kind of, you know, like things like Blue Jay Way. It's so strange and dreamlike and odd, and the production throughout, I think, is just very psychedelic and strange. And it's got things like Fool on the Hill, which is just beautiful, but again, all these strange kind of noises and sounds in it. And then you've got I Am the Walrus, which is, you know, absolute classic of all time, with all this strange going on, and umpire, stick it up your jumper. So, I mean, the whole thing, and the fact that it also, they shoved Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane on it as well, which, you know, probably should have gone on Sgt. Pepper's, but as a piece of work, I think it's amazing. I also think it's quite dark for the Beatles. It's quite sort of almost nightmarish in a lot of places, and strange, and I like that. I like it. You know, if the Beatles did a darker album, I mean, I think the White Album's quite dark in places, but I think this is just almost, it's like a bad trip in places. You know what I mean? And I just love it to bits. And I know that a lot of people say it isn't a proper album, but it's on iTunes, it's on Spotify as a full album. If someone didn't know about the Beatles and they heard this as an album, I think they'd be blown away by it. So that's why it's my number 4.
You were talking about the picture of the lady in the wheelbarrow, you know, with the spaghetti.
Yeah, being fed the spaghetti.
Did you say that there was I mean, had you watched Monty Python at that point as a child, or that's kind of?
It was well before all like Meaning of Life and all that kind of, you know, with the Mr. Creosote. I didn't even know about Python at that point.
You know, George Harrison always said he thought that the spirit of the Beatles went into Monty Python
Yes,
after
yeah,
the
that's
Beatles
right.
broke up. And I think in '67, when the Beatles did Magical Mystery Tour, you do see that side of them, that sort of deeply surreal
Yeah.
English thing, which is
Well, their
kind of
producer produced the Goons,
yeah, yeah, of course, yeah,
George
yeah,
Martin, and then
yeah,
you've got Ivor Cutler on the album, who was a comedian at the time, was
yeah,
doing comedy albums.
yeah,
There's a lot of, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of
yeah,
crossover into kind of surreal, strange
yeah,
comedy.
because it hadn't properly come through, I don't think, on Sergeant Pepper. I mean, Sergeant Pepper is more of a
Mm.
kind of Victorian musical,
Yeah,
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 and it's quite kind of wholesome and it's quite fruity and quite good fun and carnival-esque. But I
yeah.
think, right, I think then you get this little strange period, sort of in a way. This and the White Album almost sort of belong together in a way, even though the White
Mm.
Album is not psychedelic, but they both have this slightly unnerving, dreamlike, heading slightly into nightmarish territory.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
I think so, and obviously heavily influenced by psychedelic
yeah.
substances.
Okay, well, I'm going to try and neatly dovetail, and it will help me to make up my mind. Because even now, as I've got these albums in my hand, I could easily swap them round, you know. But, so for my number three, I am actually going to go with the White Album. I mean, we were talking before about, you know, when did you hear Beatles albums? And I didn't hear this
Mm.
album until it was the Christmas of 1991, I think. I had it
Wow, that late?
got it for Christmas on vinyl that year, but I immediately dug it, shall we say. I
Mm.
immediately cottoned onto it. I think what it was, I was given a tape deck for Christmas that same year. And these things
Mm.
can just have amazing little associations. So I immediately started making, you know, tape mixes of the White Album and, you know,
Yeah.
experimenting with, you know, different tracks and different orders. And I just got so totally into it. I think it was always going to be in my top four. And one of the reasons why I've not put it higher is that I've always thought that it's kind of, it's the album where they start to come unstuck a little bit.
Mm.
They fall out with George Martin, or George Martin finds himself being sidelined, essentially.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
you all start to fragment, and it's very much an album of bits and pieces, isn't it? And
Yeah.
a lot of people talk about that being one of its strengths, the fact that you never quite know what you're going to get.
Mm.
There are so many high points on it, which I love, particularly on the first disc. Now, Martha My Dear, the first track on side two, may well just be my favourite ever Beatles
Mm.
song. I just
Mm.
think it's just wonderful. It's such a
Mm.
clever, charming, joyful piece of work, really, with wonderful piano playing in it. You know, I'm So Tired, love it. Blackbird, love it. There's
Blackbird
so
is
many
for
tracks.
me like again in like one of my favorite songs ever, and
Yeah,
it's just so beautiful. It makes me almost want to cry because it's just it's so wonderful when you hear it and the lyrics and
yeah.
everything.
It's a very mysterious record. It's got a certain atmosphere to it. I can honestly say there's no other record in history which is anything like it, really. There's just all kinds of touchstones where you can hear the White Album. I think it's their most modern sounding record in a way. It's the one that
Mm.
seems to resonate most, you know, down the years. It's the one that seems to sound
Yeah.
more like a kind of modern, slightly strange rock album rather than
Yeah.
something like the Beatles. It's got a slightly different atmosphere to it. So anyway, I could have had it at number two, but I went for number three because it's slightly flawed and it's not
Mm.
the Beatles properly coming together. It doesn't have the George Martin production. It's just missing that, really,
Mm.
which is why I didn't
Yeah.
have it any higher. But I would have to have had it. I think it's great so far that we've not crossed over yet.
We haven't. No,
So,
we haven't.
Patrick,
And I don't think we will either on this because you rejected it. So
okay,
this is my number three,
okay,
obviously.
yeah.
So I think we all know what that album is.
Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, that's right. I just think it's wonderful. I think there's some incredible tracks on there. I was listening to it again last night. I was just again blown away by I Want You, She's So Heavy. I just love the way that just descends into this noise and feedback, and it's just it just gives me goosebumps listening to that. Two of Harrison's best ever songs on it, Something, which is a classic, and Here Comes the Sun as well. Two absolute amazing tracks by Harrison. It just sort of showed where he was going, and obviously his first solo album takes a lot of the stuff that he couldn't fit on any of these Beatles albums and just makes an absolute classic out of it as well. But and then you've got obviously the side two and the whole medley, the Abbey Road medley, which is again just an astonishing piece of work, and I can listen to that over and over again, and ad infinitum basically. So I just think it's a cracking album. It's iconic. it's the Beatles' Abbey Road, and you know, you're an idiot if you don't have it in your top four, basically.
Well, I'm very fond of it. I first heard it again quite late. I was in my first year at uni when I had it on CD, and I listened to it incessantly for months. And it was when I was first getting into the Beatles, and it was probably more than any other of their albums, it was the one that started to really clue me into their kind of legend, or their mythos, you know, just the story of the Beatles and how it just grew into this incredible cultural event. And Abbey Road as their swan song, obviously, and it's kind of constructed like a swan song, side 2 in particular. It seems to have this kind of monumental quality to it, which is kind of undeniable, really.
There's something rather lovely that the end was the final track that they recorded as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Also, I think it's probably the most fantastic sounding of their records in terms of.
Well, wasn't it the first that was recorded on is it 16 track? I think it was. It's an 8 track. It was basically they had double the tracks that they had on previous album. I think it was an 8 track.
I think it was 8 track, wasn't it? There's a couple of reasons why I didn't have it. I think it's the first album where you can hear the Beatles starting to imitate what's happening around them. So you've got tracks like The Sun King, which was their tip of the hat to Fleetwood Mac's.
Yes, and Albatross. Yeah.
I Want You, She's So Heavy. I mean, Black Sabbath were on the scene, you know, at this point. Heavy music was starting to come in. But from the White Album onwards, they start doing these tracks like Helter Skelter and I Want You, She's So Heavy, because they're trying to compete with The Who, and they're trying to compete with Jimi Hendrix and maybe even Black Sabbath. And I just don't think it's necessarily what they do best. And then side 2, I think is nearly flawless, but I've never been 100% convinced by parts of the medley. I think once or twice it sounds too much like odds and ends that have been sewed together.
I love Mr. Mustard and all that. And certainly when I was a kid, I just used to, you know, just keeps a 10 bob note up his nose and all that. I just thought, that's brilliant. You know, I just loved all that. So, I mean, I actually like the sound of it. And as well as being a synth nut as well, and I've got a Moog or Moog, if you're American, synth that's based on what the Moog that they used on this album, and the Moog is all over this album.
It is,
So you hear it a lot of synth, bass, and some lead lines, and it sounds brilliant. From that point of view, I really love the album.
Yeah, so this is where I could have swapped number 3 and 2 around, but I did decide to go for Sgt. Pepper at number 2. So the White Album and Sgt. Pepper, I think, are quite close together, but the reason I'm going to put Sgt. Pepper in is, even though it doesn't contain as many songs that I love, I think it's more of a rounded, accomplished album. It's the one where George Martin really comes into his own with all the orchestrations, all the tape loops, all the amazing production. And I think maybe of all the Beatles albums, this is the most cohesive one. It's the one which, from the first track all the way through to the end, even though they sort of abandoned this thing of trying to link the tracks together, it's still cohesive. Like, every song sounds like it's from the same album. I think A Day in the Life on it, obviously, is a major boon, because it's just one of the greatest pieces of sound recording ever made. It just effortlessly brought all that kind of avant-garde stuff straight into the mainstream. And I mean, the Beatles were sort of already on that trajectory with their previous record, but they really went to town with this one. And I love the Englishness of it. I love the the brass bands, that kind of English working class provincial kind of thing, which a lot of the bands that got into the Psych era, they didn't have that. It's like they were not grounded sufficiently in that kind of northern working class kind of ethos. And the Beatles were able
sitting in an English garden waiting for the sun and all that. You know, it's that. You know, let's have a cup of tea and.
I mean, again, it goes back to the Monty Python thing, I guess, doesn't it? It's like it's taking something very recognisably English, although in the Beatles' case, it's Northern English, whereas Python, I guess, was, you know, in the South. But the Beatles' kind of provincial Liverpool thing, and just turning it into this kind of dreamlike melange of just amazing sounds. You know, I mean, it's 4-track recording, just one of the most incredible feats of engineering ever. And I mean, it's Sgt. Pepper. What more can I say?
What can you say? It helped establish the album, you know, and music as an art form. It inspired a million studio producers and engineers. It's just it's an iconic cover that you know. So the whole package, I think,
Yeah.
is amazing.
But, I mean, we were talking about Magical Mystery Tour being very interesting because it has this slight darkness to it. I don't think Pepper is entirely without its dark moments. You've got A Day in the Life,
Yeah.
you've got Good Morning, which has a very angry, you know, classic John Lennon kind of angry attitude to it, hasn't it? Because I think he wrote it, didn't he? He was watching an advert one day on the TV. It was a cornflakes advert or something.
Yeah, it was something for Kellogg's cornflakes.
I do think it's maybe the last time that Lennon and McCartney worked together really productively, because you don't really hear that on Abbey Road. I mean, John famously didn't like the medley on Abbey Road. He didn't like the George Martin orchestrations on Abbey Road. But I think on Sgt. Pepper, what I've always loved is that you can hear John contributing so fully, even to the McCartney tracks that are not really up John's street. Like, you can hear him singing really amazing vocals on She's Leaving Home in the background.
Yeah. You got the classic sort of, the Getting Better.
Yeah.
Couldn't get much worse.
Yeah,
exactly. And I think you got for the benefit of Mr. Kite, which is just amazing as well, tape loops and stuff. I mean, I think that the argument you might make why it wouldn't make number one is that, again, Harrison has stronger songs on other albums.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally absolutely love Within You Without You. I remember being about 13, 14 and being obsessed with that track.
Yeah.
And I remember like rushing home from school just so I could listen to Within You Without You. I remember I can't wait to get home and listen to that again. I just got completely obsessed with it. You could argue that, other albums have better Harrison songs on it, but I think as a whole, it's just, I mean, A Day in the Life and that final piano, chord and the whole thing, it creates its own little world, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In pictures in your mind, it creates, it sometimes strikes me. I've said about how many of these albums actually have films and movies and things along with them. This doesn't, but in my head it does. Yeah. I've got pictures in my mind of the music, and I think that's what it does. It fires the imagination, and
okay,
it's cracking.
Well,
it's all right.
So it's time for your number two now. And
I think
I'm wondering whether we've now talked about your number one. Don't know. Let's see. Okay, so we have, right? Okay.
So I mean, this is it. On another day, this could easily be switcheroo. I mean, I absolutely adore this album as well, and it's got my favourite Beatles track of all time on it. Tomorrow Never Knows.
Yeah.
I still, I listened to it again, probably for the, I don't know how many thousandth time the other day, and it just again gave me goosebumps. I just think it's absolutely incredible. I think Harrison has, some of his strongest tracks on here. Taxman is amazing. Yeah, I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful album.
Yeah. What is it about Revolver? Because I've got it the other way around, so it's going to be interesting to see what it is about our slightly differing notions here.
I mean, it's hard to criticize it because I love it to bits. I mean, it's got like Eleanor Rigby on it, and the only thing I would say is that some of the tracks are quite similar. In that sometimes I forget what the names of the tracks are. Yeah, because they kind of rock at the same kind of pace, and they're sort of, this is me being hypercritical. I mean, God's sake, criticizing Revolver. I can't believe I'm doing this. But Tomorrow Never Knows and Eleanor Rigby are probably the ones that are kind of very different on there. Whereas the others, they do tend to sound a bit samey. And if I'm being hypercritical, again, I'm being really, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Got to Get You Into My Life is a bit Radio 2. Good Day Sunshine is a bit like that as well. It's kind of a bit kind of too jolly almost. I mean, it's hard to criticize it because I just love it so much. And as I say, Tomorrow Never Knows is just on another planet, as far as the production.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons I've never done a Beatles rankings video is I've always been a bit impatient with myself, because Revolver was the first Beatles album I ever heard. I think I was maybe 5 or 6, and it kind of defined my entire musical world, after that.
Yeah.
But I did go through a phase in later life, and I was about maybe 19, 20, and I went through a bit of a kind of bad patch just in my life in general, and it really became one of my go-to comfort albums. It was an album which always plugged me straight back into happier times, happier memories.
Yeah.
I really did develop a very strong emotional attachment to it. But then in later years, I became quite impatient with it. It was almost like, am I duty bound always to have Revolver at number one? You know, can I never escape from this? Almost like a kind of dogma that you impose upon yourself. And I think, well, really, is Revolver really better than Sergeant Pepper? Is it really better than Abbey Road? You know, and I think you're right. I think you can, some of these tracks, you wouldn't play them to people to demonstrate how incredible the Beatles were as songwriters. I mean, you wouldn't play them Dr. Robert. You wouldn't play them Andrew Bird Can Sing. I mean, they would hear them and go, yeah, it's okay. It's not like a fantastic song. It's just, but I think as an album, it does work. I think, although my other criticism of it that I'll say now is that I think it is one of the ones where it slightly sound like Paul McCartney's making a different album to John Lennon. And it's just how you interpret that. But I've sometimes got an issue with the flow of this record, as in what's the relationship between the tracks? How do I feel going out of And Your Bird Can Sing into For No One? Is there a kind of lurch there? It's like a slightly strange thing where you have to...
Well, got to Get You Into My Life, into Tomorrow Never Knows, is one of the biggest lurches, but it almost kind of tees it up. Like I remember,
true,
you know, when I first heard Revolver, I can remember where I was when I heard Tomorrow Never Knows, because it just blew my mind completely. You know, I listened to it on my dad's stereo, you know, when I was about 9 years old, and then you heard Got to Get You Into My Life, which is, you know, this is a nice song, and then Tomorrow Never Knows came on. It was like, what is that, you know? And it just blew my tiny little mind.
Talking of dads, I've got a good memory as well, because my dad had this record. He gave it to my mother for Christmas. He was always a hi-fi buff, and so he always liked the sound quality. But he really responded to the McCartney tracks, you know, Here, There and Everywhere, For No One, because they got that kind of classical feel to, you know, the music sounds like something that was almost done to impress a music teacher. And my dad loved all that, but he could never wrap his head around Tomorrow Never Knows. He always used to take it off. He'd say, "Oh no, there's a song on the end of the record that you don't want to hear." You know?
That's great. That's brilliant.
And, you know, when he finally played it to me, I didn't either love it or hate it. I think my 6-year-old ears could hear that it was strange. It was different to the rest of the record. I didn't love it, but I could hear that it was different. Years later, when I got into my 20s and started making certain journeys of the mind, shall we say, that track really made sense then and blew my mind. You know?
I went to I think we were at the same rave where the Chemical Brothers did a remix of Tomorrow Never Knows, where they looped, you know, and love is all, and they just kept playing that and putting more and more drums on it, and the whole place went absolutely mad, you know.
The other thing that I've always loved about Revolver is the way that the George Harrison songs and the John Lennon songs, they seem to really go together. They all have this kind of slightly kind of angsty sound, where I think John and George were both, long before Paul, I think they were both starting to realise this Beatles thing, it's like, not quite sure we want to carry on with this, really. You know, it's hassly, it's really annoying. And you can hear that coming through in John's lyrics, definitely. You can hear it coming through in George's lyrics, and those songs sound quite similar. They have a very similar guitar sound, a very similar kind of vibe to them. But then, meanwhile, over in this corner, you've got McCartney just doing "Good Day Sunshine," you know, and doing Motown spoofs, and you really start to hear the way the band is starting to fracture, with John and George getting increasingly angry about
and getting into Indian instruments and all sorts of stuff. And I mean, Harrison thinks of Rubber Soul and Revolver as almost like two sides of the same coin, doesn't he? Revolver's definitely a kind of real step forward, and the Tomorrow Never Knows kind of, I think, just leads. It's like, right, that's where the Beatles are going now. It's like, you know, wait till you hear the next album, sort of thing.
Well, it's very cool that we missed each other completely, really, all the way through, and then at the end, we had number 2 and number 1 was swapped round.
Yeah, so my number 1 was Sergeant Pepper, obviously. So you know, which again, on another day I might choose Revolver, but I just think as a package, just, you know, I think I'm almost being churlish to not have it at number 1. It's like, you know, why wouldn't you?
Okay, well, thank you for joining me for that. That was most enjoyable.
Good stuff. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, and I always enjoy our chats.
Cool. All right, viewers, well, do let us know, what are your top 4 Beatles albums, and drop some comments in the box below to let us know what you think of what we've said. Have we crossed any lines? Have we offended anybody's sensibilities? Let us know. All right. So I'll see you in the next video, and thanks again to Jamie. Take care. Bye.
Cheers, bye. Just blank, Jim. What's that one?